Hello everyone, welcome to ChessNeeds. I am FIDE Master Joydeep Dutta and I am really excited to take you through one of the most important chapters in chess, the basic Rook endgame. We will soon be launching our exclusive course material in ChessNeeds official website, specially designed for tournament players who wants to learn chess the right way with clear concepts, practical examples and structured study plans. In today's session, we will give you a glimpse of what are coming. We will explore the essential Rook endgame position for every rated players. You must know this techniques, how to convert the winning position with correct technique and how to defend under pressure with confidence. So let's get started with strengthening your endgame foundation. Okay, we'll start with the first position. This is known as the Philidor's position in the Rook endgame. So basically over here, as you can see, white is trying to place his king to d6 and then followed by e6, and afterwards there is a strong threat of rook a8 checkmate. So in this position, as you can see, black is defending this position, but you must know the correct technique in order to make a draw in this position. So black should not allow white king to reach on to the 6th rank. So here black should play rook to h6. The idea behind this move, rook h6, is basically to prevent white to play king to d6. And at the same time, now black is forcing white to push the pawn to e6, because so that afterwards white can actually play king d6, and now black will play rook h1. The idea is very simple over here. Black will start giving checks continuously from rear. First he will play rook d1, then followed by rook e5, so on and so forth. So here, if for example, if let's say white is playing king d6, then black will play rook d1 check, king e5, rook e1, and it will become a draw easily. I hope you guys can understand the concept of Philidor position. Now let's move on to the next position. Okay, and this is the next position. As you can see over here, it's black to play again, and now you can pause this video for a while. You can take 2 minutes, think how you can make a draw in this position, and then you can resume the video again. Okay, so the idea is very simple over here. Now in this position also, black will try to force white to push the pawn to 6th rank. So he will play rook e1. Now basically, if you push the pawn to 6th rank, let's say if you place your pawn to e6, let's say if you are playing e6, then again the same thing will repeat, just like the previous position. Black will play rook d1 and then start giving him checks continuously, and it will become a draw for sure. Okay, so now after rook e1, here white should play king e6. Now white is actually threatening rook a8 checkmate, and here black should play king f7. Sorry, king f8, because now black is trying to place his king to g7, and now rook a8 check. These moves are almost forced. White doesn't have any other option apart from these moves. So king g7, and now white will play rook to e8, trying to freeing his king from e6. Now king will be placed on d6 and then followed by e6 and e7. And now there is a beautiful move over here for black. Can you spot the move? I would advise you to pause this video for 1 minute at least, and then think of the move for black, and then again you can resume the video, and then you can understand the idea. So here the move is actually rook a1. The idea is quite simple for black. Now black will start giving checks horizontally. Now black is actually trying to play rook a6 and then start giving checks, and after that it is almost impossible for white to escape from those checks, and it will become a draw. I hope you can understand this concept as well. Now let's move on to the next position. Yes, so this is the next position. This is also known as the position by Ewey, because Max Ewey, the 5th official world champion, invented this position. So it's again black to play, and black has to make a draw in this position. But the question is how he can make a draw in this position, because it seems black is in difficult position. Black is struggling to get a draw over here, and it's not so easy, but if you know the correct technique, then of course you can make a draw in this position. Okay, so over here black will play rook a7 check. This is a quite obvious move, because otherwise white is just going to give a check by placing his rook to g1, and afterwards it will be a losing position for black. So rook a7 move is very important. Now white has to decide whether he has to place his rook to d7 or whether to move his king somewhere. This is a crucial position for both, for white as well as for black. So now, of course, if white will place his king to d6, then black will play king f8, and just on time black king reaches on the 8th rank, and afterwards it will be an easy draw. So here white should play rook to d7, and after rook d7, now black, of course black will not exchange this rook, because e captures d7 and then simple d8 is equal to queen, and eventually white will win that position. So now black will play rook a8, again not allowing white king to reaches on the 8th rank. So now and now if you place your king to d6, then again black will play king f8, and it will become a draw. Okay, so here white will play rook d6. It's a very tricky move actually, to be very honest, because now white is playing rook d6 with a very logical intention, and that is, if now black will again repeat the move like rook a7 check, then white will play king e8, and with the intention of playing e7 and then followed by king d7 and f8, king d8 and e8 is equal to queen, and that's how white can easily win that position, right? So here obviously black will not play that move. So here the correct move is, and even also I'll show you another variation, the main idea behind this move, rook d6. Let's say if black will play rook to b8, then white will play rook to d8, and then rook b7 on the only move, and then king d6. If rook b6, then king d7, rook b7, then king c6, and rook e7, and finally king to d6. And now it's a clear winning position for white, because after this move black has to move his rook somewhere, because if you place your king to f6, then rook f8 check is winning for white. So you have to move your rook to a7 or somewhere, and then e7 is the winning move for white, right? Okay, and now let's move on to the rook d6 position. And here of course rook a7 is not working, because the reason I have already mentioned, that is king e8 and then followed by e6 to e7 is winning, right? Okay, so after rook to d6, the correct move over here for black is king g6. An extraordinary move over here, because this is the only move in this position for black to survive, because with all other moves black is just going to lose that position. After king g6, now white will play king rook d7. Now again king g7. Otherwise black was losing. So after king g7, now rook to c7, and now white will play rook a7. And practically now there is no improvement for white in this position. Now let's say if king to e8, then king f6, threatening the e6 pawn, and if you push the pawn to e7, and then simple move is of course rook 8, king to d7, and king f7, rook b7, and now it's a simple draw. Rook to e8, now there is a simple threat of capturing the pawn, and it will become a draw, right? Okay, hope you guys can understand the concept of the position of EV as well. Now let's move on to the next position. This is the loosener position, also known as the bridge building technique. This is another important technique in the rook endgame. So here, as you can see, white king is stuck on the g8 square, but at the same time the pawn is on g7. So as you know, if the pawn reaches on the 7th rank, the chances are quite high to win a match. But in this position, it's very difficult for white king to escape from that position, because either the black king is not allowing white king to escape on f7 square, and as well as the rook which is on h2, the black rook, that is also not allowing white king to move on to the h7 square, right? So now we are going to learn how to win this position by using the technique called loosener, right? Okay, so guys, you can, if you know this concept, then it's very good. If you don't know the concept, then you can pause this video over here and you can take 2 minutes to think of it and then come up with the idea how white can win this position. Okay, now I am going to show you how white can actually win this position. So the first move is rook to e1 check. Now black is having only 2 possibilities. One is he can move his king to f6, and another one is he can move his king to d7 or d6 maybe. But of course king f6 is a losing move. It's a blunder, you can say, because after king f6 the simple move is king to f8, and then it will become a clearly winning position, because now there is no probability for black to prevent the white queen, which is gonna be on g8 square, right? So let's move back to the previous position, and that is after rook e1. Now black has to take a decision. Either he can play king d7 or he can play king d6 as well. First, let us discuss what about king d6, and then again we'll discuss the king d7 as well. So with this move king d6, now white will simply play king to f8, rook f2 check, king to e8, and then rook g2, preventing the queen, white queen, on g8. And now after rook g2, now white will play one simple move, and that is none other than rook e7, and with the intention of playing king f8, rook f7, and g8 is equal to queen, and that's how white can easily win this position. I hope that you can understand the remaining concept of this position. Now let's move back to the previous position after rook e1. Now we'll discuss the move king d7, of course, which is the natural move over here, king d7. And now this move is significantly important in order to win this position. It will play a major role. This move will play a major role over here. Okay, can you guess the move? The move is rook to e4. Why this move is so important? Because now there is a chance for white king to escape to f7, but afterwards rook will start giving him check by rook f2, rook g2, and so on. So by placing his rook to the 4th rank, actually white is trying to hide from the checks by interference with this rook in the 4th rank. Okay, now let's see how that is possible. Let's say if now black is playing rook to h1, now white will play his king to f7, rook f1 check, king to g6, and then rook g1 check again, king f6, rook to g2. Because if instead of rook g2, if king d6 would have been played, then rook d4 check again, and then king c5 and rook d8 is winning, right? Now this g8 queen threat is unstoppable. So after rook g2, now rook e5, and now the simple idea is to play rook to g5, and then afterwards g8 is equal to queen, and this is a simple winning position now. Well, now let's move on to the next position. Yeah, so this position is known as max quartet position. Okay, now in this position, as you can see here, also white king is stuck on a8 square and the pawn is on a7, but the problem is that white king won't be able to escape from b7 because black rook is on b1. So you have to do something so that black rook will be forced to move from b1 square, so that you can afterwards escape with your king from a8 square, and that's how you can actually escaping with your king, and at the same time making room for the pawn to promote to a 8 square, and then you eventually will get a queen and you will also get the point as well, right? So the first move is very important. The first move is rook to c2. Okay, and you must know another thing. If it is only possible if the king is cut up on the e file, because if the king is already reaches over to the e7 or e8 somewhere, then it will be a draw. Then you won't, let's say if the rook is on d2 and the king is on e7, then that position would have become a draw, because then you won't be able to, black king just reaches on time and that king won't be able to improve your king position. And it is only possible to win this position if the black king is on f7 and the cut off from via the e file. Okay, so the first move is rook to c2 and now king e7. Okay, and now this move is also very important, rook c8, and now black is having two options. One is king to d7 and another one is king to d6. So first we'll check the king d7 move. If black will play king d7, then rook b8, simple move, rook a1, king b7, rook b1, king a6 threatening queen, and now if rook a1, then king to b6, if rook b1, and now king is safe on c5, king escape, and then after this escape, now white is simply threatening a8 is equal to queen. Okay, so let's move back to the previous position. Yeah, now here black is having another option, and that is king d6. Okay, so after king d6, now white will definitely play rook b8, otherwise white won't be able to freeing his king. So now rook to h1. Once this king will reaches on the c7 square, afterwards it will become a draw. So you have to make sure, you have to do something so that your opponent's king won't be able to reaches on c7 square. That is very important. So after rook h1, now king b7, now rook b1 check, king to c8, again rook c1 check, king to d8, and now rook to h1 with the intention of playing rook h8, and it's a checkmate. So white must act something in this position, and now move is rook to b6, king c5. Okay, now guys, you can pause this video over here and you can take again 2 minutes. Think of this position, how white can improve this position and eventually win this position. Because right now you are having two options. One is rook a6 and another one is rook c6. One is right and another one is wrong. So you have to consider both the options and come up with the correct one. Okay guys, so I hope that you might have got the right answer over here, but still I must show you the remaining moves. The correct move is rook c6 over here, but we'll see now what about rook to a6, why it is not a good move, because now white is also threatening a8 is equal to queen. But the problem is black will start giving checks. Rook to h8 check, king e7, now rook h7 check, king to e8, rook h8 check, king f7, and now finally rook 8, then king e7, king b5, rook a1, and king b6. Now king d6, rook into a5, sorry, rook into a7, rook b1, and now there is a tricky move. If you place your king to a6 and then king c6, and then that position is winning for white because the checkmate threat is unstoppable, and then you might have to lose your rook on a7. So the correct move is king to a5, and now if white will place his king to c5, then rook c7, and it will become a draw, right? Okay, so let's move back to the original position. Yeah, the king c5. So the correct move, as I have mentioned already, that is rook c6 check. And now if king b5, then rook c8 is winning. If king b5, then rook c8 is winning. So after rook c6, black should play king to d5, and now king rook a6, rook h8, rook h8 over here, and then king c7, and then rook h7 and king b6, and that's how white can win this position easily, right? So that was a quick journey through some of the most essential rook endgame ideas from Lucina and Philido and even Max Carded as well. So these concepts from foundation of every serious player's understanding. In our upcoming ChessNeeds course material, we will find many such topics explained systematically with step-by-step lessons, interactive exercises, and model games designed to help you think like a professional. If you enjoyed the session, stay tuned to ChessNeeds for more insight video and structured learning content. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the end game, precision is power. See you all in the next session. Thank you. Signing out.